Welcome to Freya's Fairy Tales, where we believe fairy tales are both stories we enjoyed as children and something that we can achieve ourselves. Each week, we will talk to authors about their favorite fairy tales when they were kids and their adventure to holding their very own fairy tale in their hands. At the end of each episode, we will finish off with a fairy tale or short story read as close to the original author's version as possible. I am your host, Freya Victoria. I'm an audiobook narrator that loves reading fairy tales, novels, and bringing stories to life through narration. I'm also fascinated by talking to authors and learning about their why and how for creating their stories. We have included all of the links for today's author and our show in the show notes. Be sure to check out our website and sign up for our newsletter for the latest on the podcast. Today is part 1 of 2, where we are talking to Claudia Blood about her novels. Over the next 2 weeks, you will hear about writing from a young age, overcoming writer's block, dealing with negative reviews, trying to make sense of your dreams, finding your audiobook narrator, learning how to promote your books, making sure to keep your story trucking along, not bogging it down with the details with an info dump, and flying by the seat of your pants. To a point. Ravenne, Renegades Rising. A brilliant scientist? A tragic mistake? Can she save what she's already lost? Ravenne has worked hard to see the launch of Horizon, the first light drive, come to fruition. But her laser focus on the big day leads to tragedy when her daughter is caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. When Ravenne discovers the truth behind the accident, she seeks vengeance against the company at fault, and is given an impossible choice that leaves her on a year-long flight to deep space. Lonely, despondent, angry, Ravenne is lost. Until she discovers a video that seems to show her daughter being saved by a mysterious figure on that fateful day. Confident the message she receives is from her future self, Ravenne sets out on a mission to invent time travel and go back to change the past. Only messing with fate and time has unintended consequences. Ravenne must become the villain to be a hero. Ravenne is one of 4 interconnected novellas. The full arc of the story is resolved in the final novel. This novella ends in a cliffhanger. All right, well, The name of the podcast is Freya's Fairy Tales. And that's fairy tales in 2 ways. So fairy tales are both something that we either watched or read or listened to as kids. And that includes, other short stories that you may have liked as a kid. And it's also the journey of you spending weeks, months, years working on your book to then be able to hold that in your hand is a fairy tale for you as the author. So I like to start off with, what was your favorite fairy tale or short story when you were a kid, and did that favorite change as you grew up?
So I used to love the Aesop tales where they
Okay.
had yes, and it's funny I say that. I remember reading them and I think they're internalized, but I'm sitting there going, "Okay, she's gonna ask me what one," and I'm like, "Oh." But I just remember reading them and loving them, that they were life lessons and they were just so easy to understand, and they made them
Mm-hmm.
approachable, and I just love that concept. So that's where I think I started. And then okay, I don't know if this is I love Disney movies. Right now,
Okay.
I have small kid well, I don't they're not that small, but they went through the Disney phase, and so I love what they do with Disney movies. Now, they make it a little bit, too much happy ending in my opinion sometimes, some of the originals were
Yeah, some of those stories are not happy at
right,
all.
right, The Little Mermaid, right, and, some of those original things,
Yeah.
and Rapunzel, not happy,
No.
but I still there's just so much, you we all maybe we don't all, but I want people to have their happy ending, right? I want that. I should have been a romance author, but I'm not, but I totally want them to have their happy ending, whatever
I
that
mean,
is.
well, in most of those stories, Aesop or any of the other ones, that a lot of them were collected by the Grimm brothers, but they were like oral traditions. They,
Oral traditions.
combined
Yep,
into a form where they were all together.
right.
But a lot of those were like with the Aesops for some kind of a lesson. Um,
Yes.
some of them, I swear the lesson was to just scare the crap out of the children because they are disturbing.
They're disturbing.
But
Yes. Yes.
they all had, and usually, and quite a few of them at the very end will have some like little poem for like the moral to the story is
Right.
whatever.
Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And you're like, oh, that was what I was
Oh,
supposed to
that's what
get.
that was. Oh, do you remember the one? And this is, I don't even, this was, I think it was early Disney with the grasshopper and the ants.
Mm-hmm.
And the world owes me a living. That made it like the nice little ditty. And I always thought about that, like just that whole. You do come in, and we're all self-centered, and we all think that we're owed something. And no, it's hard work and it's effort and it's us trying to make things happen. In my opinion,
I mean, it could be easy, but you're also, and I post these kind of things all the time on my social medias.
yeah,
It could be easy if you want to stay where you are. But if
right,
you want to improve and go places,
yep,
it's going to be hard. You're going to have to learn something new. You're
something
going to have to
new,
do something that you don't want to
yep,
do.
yep.
Whatever the case may be, if you want to go places, you have to put in the effort
You
to
have to
go
put in the
there
effort.
or you're not
Yeah,
doing anything. So like
and
if I made a podcast
yep,
or an audiobook and no one ever talked about the podcast or the audiobook, I'm never going to sell anything. Never going to go
right.
anywhere. No one's ever going to
Right.
download
Right. That's one
anything.
facet of what has to happen in
Yeah.
order for you to go somewhere. There's also that whole, like, I've known people who things have come very easy to them, but that doesn't necessarily make them happy, and it doesn't necessarily get them where they want to be, you
Well, and then
know?
there's too that sense of accomplishment when you've like put in all this
The
effort.
end. Yeah.
Yeah, when you've put in all this effort to then, sell copies of your book, it's like, "Oh my god, I did this." Like, there is no, "Well, something happened and, like, now what?"
Right, right. The Deus ex machina or whatever comes in and says, "You will sell books,"
Yeah.
or whatever.
Alright, so next I like to ask, when did you know that you wanted to write books or stories?
So, I think I've been writing for a long time. I wanted to be a writer as a younger girl, and I wrote some very weird, crazy things. But there was always that. I have the but. Oh my gosh, I said but. That's not what you do when you do improv. Um, but there was this pressure, as you know, to try and do something that will support yourself. And writing is not necessarily something that's deemed supportable. So it
Mhm.
was suppressed for a long, long time. So it was always there and always, around. But I went into computer science instead and did that for a long time before I came back and I was like, what have you got to lose? You kind of have to embrace it and really like
Right.
give it a true go. Yeah. So,
Okay, and so you wrote since you were a girl. How long did
yep.
it take you to write your first full-length book?
Oh, there's so many starts and stops and so many half completed projects and so many
Okay,
you look
so
back
for
and you're like,
first one you got from beginning to
oh.
end, how long did it take you?
So, so okay, there's the first one that I actually finished. So I had something I'd been working on for like 5, 6 years that I could never quite get done, and I recognized that I was missing a piece of something. Like I don't know if you ever
Mhm.
do this with your to-do list. Like if you need to call the doctor, if you don't know the doctor's number, you may not actually call the doctor because it's too hard. As
Mhm.
funny as that sounds. So if you
Oh
get the
gosh,
number
I have to
first
Google it.
and then right, and then call the doctor, it happens. So I ended up creating a book, end-to-end book that didn't have any fantasy elements, anything else. And that took me like 6 months. I had the idea and I just wrote all the way to the end and I got it done. I was like, yes. And then I hated the book because it didn't have any fantasy and sci-fi elements. And I had to rewrite it to add in all of that stuff. But that whole like getting that first book done, and then I went back to the previous one and finally had enough confidence maybe to
Mhm.
get that book done. So the first book that I didn't finish first, but the longest was like 7 years, I think.
Okay, and so you write the end. What did you
Yeah.
do after that?
I agonized over whether it was good enough. I put it through to editors. I tried some baiting, like everything that you do when you're flailing around trying to figure out if it's something that is good because you want to make the best story possible,
Yeah,
right? Like you want to have the best product.
that someone else tell me if this is good or am I
Right.
crazy?
Am I crazy? Yeah. And so then after putting it through its paces, I ended up indie publishing. So I'll have my seventh book indie published in on October 24th of 2022. So,
Okay. I
yeah.
kind of had that similarly with like, I just started narrating back last year. Like, I just passed my year mark of
Yeah.
narrating. And I kind of had that at the beginning too. I'm like, oh, maybe I'll land like 5 books and like, that'll be about it. Like, who's going to want my voice? Whatever.
Right. The self-doubt.
I'm, let's see, almost to 100 audiobooks
Outstanding.
contracted. I'm booked out for almost a year. I'm
Awesome.
like, clearly in
Did
my head, I'm like, I did
did it
something
stop the
right.
voice though? Did it stop the little voice in there that still says, "Ooh," like, or did the
Really,
voices like 100
I
I'm good?
still had that voice in my head until I had to have like a sound engineer come in and like kind of tweak some of my settings.
Yeah.
And he was like, he doesn't know who I am because I've been doing this for very long and nobody
Yeah.
knows my name other than, people on social media that see me. And he was like, how are things going? Whatever, whatever. And I was like, oh, I just finished my whatever the number was at the time. This was several months ago. And he's like, you're doing good. I
Oh.
guess. I'm like, okay. And like, he's someone that like, he tweaks sound levels for thousands of people. His
That's a
wife is a
cool job.
professional narrator. He professionally edits other people's audio. So I'm like, for someone like that to be like, you're
Yep.
doing a good job. And then I would post up auditions on TikTok of like me just narrating.
Yeah.
And people would be like, oh my gosh, you did such a great job. That was a great audition or whatever. And so like it feels so stupid that you have to have this external validation,
Validation. Yeah.
but all of us, I
We
feel
need
like, do
it.
at some point.
Yeah.
So now I'm kind of like, clearly I know my stuff, like I'm good.
Yep.
And in the podcasting space, I was kind of like, I started narrating, and then about a month later, I started a daily fiction podcast for like practice with fiction and voices
Right.
and narrating
Yeah.
in general. And I'm like, no one's paying me for it, so if it's
Have
terrible,
fun.
doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But I went to a conference in August of this year, and, I'm thinking it's supposed to be like the biggest podcast conference in the world. And so I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to be this like small fish in this big pond of all these big people. And while I was at the conference, I hit 15,000 downloads. And everybody, like, I would say that and their eyes would get gigantic, like, oh my God.
Right.
Like,
That's
and
all
like,
the external
okay.
validation. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm like, and my mom, I took my mom with me because I didn't want to go to this for the first time by myself. And so I'm
Yep.
like, Mom, will you go with me? And she said, she would tell people the same thing. And she said, yeah, you're clearly one of the better ones that are attending. I think all the other like bigger names were the speakers and stuff. But yeah, it's just that external validation. And since then, like
Yeah.
I've bowled through. I'm almost to 19,000 since August. I've gone from
Sweet.
15 to 19. So I'm like, good God, we're just like the ball is rolling with all of
Yep. And it's
this.
down here gaining momentum.
I'm like, all right. So same thing, same, you think it's over, but you have to promote and you have to,
Yep. You
you
do.
you feel
It's not
like,
over when you have the product. It's more.
yeah. Well, and I'm
Yeah.
sure you have 7 books out now, you said, or you're about to release the 7th.
Yep.
And so do you ever look at your reviews to see what people are
I
saying, or do you avoid those?
do. I do. I do look at those and I'm always like very almost afraid like that someone is gonna be like, you suck, right? Like because they do. I mean, people are not always all that nice when they
No.
get very, passionate
No.
about that. So, but I've been very fortunate that I've had pretty much good reviews. There've been the worst reviews so far have been things like it's not my cookie, right? So it's one of those like so like I love chocolate chip cookies. And so if someone bakes the perfect oatmeal cookie and it's everything they ever dreamt of from oatmeal cookie and gave it to me, I'm not gonna like it. It's not a
Right.
chocolate chip cookie. Same
Right.
thing with books, right? Like it's the same sort of thing. So the review was, "Oh, this was great, but I was looking more for this." And I'm like, "Well, it's not that,
Right.
so okay."
I get
So,
that. I mean, narrators get that with voices too. So like most of my negative reviews are just like, I didn't like her voice. And I
what do you
can't,
do?
I
Right,
know
can't change
I
it.
read them because like for you, I'm sure you want to see, is there something that is repeatedly being said that I
Yes,
need to
that I
change?
need to change.
So
Yes.
far, just they don't like my voice, and I can't change that.
Right.
So just like you can't make a sci-fi fantasy book into a romance.
Exactly. It's just it doesn't hit the beats, it's not gonna be it. Yeah.
So now your books are sci-fi and fantasy, right?
Yeah, and I'm a cross genre, I think is the right way to say it. So I've got a series that's sci-fi and fantasy, a trilogy that's completed, and I'm working on the thing that's coming out as a prequel to it. It's the bad guy story because the bad
Okay.
guy Ravenne is awesome. I just love her. Um, and then I've got a fantasy series called the Merge series, and it's pure fantasy. There's no real science inside of it. And then I've got a supernatural. Would it be? Suspense, I think that's what they call it. So it's got the fantasy elements, but it's much more suspenseful than the
Okay.
other ones. There's a lot more danger and that kind of jazz. So I'm sort of like the elements that are the same as the fantasy element, the adventure elements are kind of the same. And there's always a little bit of mystery, but I
Okay.
love fantasy and Dungeons and Dragons and unicorns and different things like that. I just love that. So
So where does your inspiration come from for your books?
a bunch of them came from dreams. So I would wake up. My favorite one for the Relic trilogy. It was this dream about this team of people, team of guys going through the jungle, and
Mhm.
they unearth this this old alien artifact. And then, like when they go inside, they start the machine up, and it's like the Terminator light ball. Like you remember when they like it was that turned up on this platform, and there's an 80s aerobics instructor
Oh my
on
gosh.
there. I know, and I was
Got
like,
like Richard Simmons going on.
it was a chick. It was like it was a woman, and it was like the typical sort of like and not, but she was sort of
Big
like
blonde hair.
big blonde hair and the blue, the leg warmers, and just
Yeah.
like the big purse thing, and so I basically was like, what the heck is going on? Like, how does this make any sense? And so the story came from trying to make sense of everything that happened. And that one
Okay.
has time travel and it has like, yeah, all sorts of different things in it. So
Fun. So
yeah,
dreams.
dreams. Yes.
Or trying to make sense of the
Of
dreams.
the dream. Yeah. Yeah.
So you have like you basically start with like a dream journal that you then expand upon.
I get this scene in my head, and my brain will keep going back to the scene, going, well, what happened? And why are they there? And where did this come from? And it's weird because when I start like asking myself questions or other people do, I know the answers. And it's like,
Mhm.
huh,
I should write the answers down to
I
my
should
own
write the answers
questions.
down. Yeah. Yeah.
Fun. Now, I did see, as a narrator, I
Yeah.
did see that your trilogy has been narrated. How did that come about?
Yes. I ended up going through Draft to Digital, and they've got some of the narrators there that you can interview. And I found my narrator through that, and I just love the idea of it. So I ended up paying for the audiobooks. It was
Okay.
fun though. I'd never done anything like that. And like the guy was so kind and nice and like almost held my hand a little bit because I'd be like, hi, I'm freaking out about this. And he was totally like, you're okay. It's okay. And I was like, okay.
I've
And then
had
I
to do
couldn't
that.
even did you? And then I couldn't even like I can't hear someone else read my stuff because it's embarrassing and I'm like, "Oh god, people are going to think this sucks." So I knew I wasn't a good like person to so I sent one to my sister and I sent it to, some friends and I was like, "Does this sound okay? Like does this sound okay? Like are you guys like okay?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, he sounds great." I'm like, "Okay."
I had an author had to send it to her best friend to like, is this good because it's my book and I just think it's good, or is this like actually good because I don't listen to audiobooks?
Right.
And then I had one author that she had like she won some kind of a pitch war on Twitter.
Huh.
And so her publisher is actually who hired me, but she heard the clip thinking, oh, they're just gonna have gotten some like side of the road guy that like it's not gonna be
Right.
good. And she's like, I send her like the audition piece or whatever. She's like, you sound like an actual narrator. Like, why, thank
Thank
you.
you. Awesome.
So
That's
it's
a sign you put on your wall, right? Like that
yeah.
you sound like an actual narrator.
Yeah. And then it was like several months later, I submitted an audition for an epic fantasy book. and the guy like messages me back, and like subtitle, oh my god, the message heading is like, oh my god, and I'm like, this is either going to be
This
really
is gonna
good or
be
really
good.
bad. And it was like, oh my god, you did such an awesome job, I love it, let's go. So
Yes.
I'm like, all right, it was good, but I'm like, I mean, if it was bad, I imagine most people don't message you if they don't like it. So you occasionally get the ones that do, and you're like, you could have just like not.
Not. Right. And it's probably not like to give you constructive feedback, but to just to kinda,
No, it's like, hey,
whine.
we didn't want you. We liked someone else better. Like,
Okay,
well, thanks.
thanks.
I got that when I got the automated message saying you didn't get this book. Okay.
Oh
It's
my
a very
god.
generic response. It'll be like,
Right.
hey, this book that you auditioned for went to someone else. And you're like, okay.
Okay. As it happens.
I'm like, that all right, sounds good. and then other ones you're like, they send out ones too. I guess the authors will go to a different platform like Draft to Digital, I guess.
Okay.
Because occasionally you'll get some saying the author pulled the title. So like it's not that
Ah,
you didn't get it, it's that like it's not up there anymore. So
right,
you
it went through a different
don't
venue.
know.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
Draft to Digital, I think, went to Find a Way because I think it's Find a Way that I actually ended up going through.
Okay. Yeah. Find a
Yeah.
way. Um, I can't manage to figure out how to get set up with them. I don't know. They're another one.
Yep, there's a lot. I mean, because it's popular. Isn't that like the trend right now is and audiobooks are like on the
Hmm.
rise compared to everything else?
Yeah. So we
Yeah.
kind of talked about this ahead of time. So what have you done up to this point to promote your books?
Okay, I don't I am naturally an introvert. So the whole concept of and I'm from the Midwest and I'm like so like talking about myself and trying to say look how great this is really against like my nature. Like that is
Yeah.
not easy. So I've tried like getting some marketing people. I've tried some of the newsletter exchanges. I basically thrown a ton of spaghetti against the wall trying to figure out how to do it. I've done the fussy librarians and the bargain booksies and like all those different sorts of things and
Mm-hmm.
on all the right Facebook groups and blah 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 blah. So I've tried a lot of different things, and it's and podcasts and things like that, right? Like
Yeah.
trying to get out there, and um, so that's what I've basically done. So it's a whole range of things. Some successful, some not,
Right.
but I keep trying because,
Well,
like
and
you
I
said,
feel
it's part of
like,
that dream.
and I talked to another author about this, and I keep telling my husband this. He's working on a book. I'm working on my own books. We're just very
Yep.
crafty family. But I'm like, you're going to join a Facebook group, and there's going to be 1,000 different ideas for how to promote your book, but not every
Yes.
idea is going to work for every genre, is going
Right.
to work for every particular author.
Yep.
There are just some platforms that, like, I cheat. I just post the same thing across everything. Um,
Right.
I'm told that's not what you're supposed to do. I don't care. I don't have time. So
Right.
that's what I do.
Right. Do I write books or do I promote? Right. Because if I
Yeah.
stop writing books, I have nothing to promote. Right. Like there's like that whole balance of time. And it's not like for all of us, it's the only thing we do. I've got the kids and the hubby and the day job and
Yeah.
and pets and
Well, and I'm over here. I'm like, okay, I have 3 podcasts and I narrate audiobooks pretty much full time, and I have a full time job. So I'm like, when
right. When do you
exactly?
sleep?
I do. I do sleep. I'm like, everything is like segmented in my day. Like, do this in the morning and then do this and then do
Yeah.
that and just keep it
Yeah.
segmented. Um,
That's good. That's
but yeah,
good. Good
it's,
habits to get into.
yeah. it's,
Yeah.
I did not start that way at the beginning. I learned towards the beginning of the year when I started getting more books. Like last year, I got all nonfiction. And
Okay.
nonfiction, I didn't have to read ahead of time because
Right.
beyond the words that you don't know how to pronounce, which you can look
Right.
up on the spot,
Yep.
I don't need to know what the story is.
Right. Right.
So,
Right. There's no change in tone because, oh no, I'm scared or
yeah,
whatever,
I don't
right? You're
have to
like, it's
know the
nonfiction.
personality of the character. There is no character.
Right.
so,
Right.
so last year I did that, and then this year I started landing. So I start that I'm only landing nonfiction. I start landing fiction at the beginning of this year. And then it was like,
Nice.
oh, now I have to read the book ahead of time
Right.
because I got to know the personalities. So I pick voices that match. I don't want to give an angry voice to a bubbly character. That would be
Right.
bad.
Right. That would be
Uh,
bad.
so now I'm like, have to add in the time to read the book ahead of
Yes.
time.
Yes.
It all gets done. And the
Yeah.
weekends are generally my time to I do these interviews. And then
Nice.
I do if I happen to have, my daughter's birthday was this week. So I had a day where I didn't get everything done. So I have to catch up over the weekend.
Yep. Yep. Because with segmented, I'm sure it's a tight schedule, and as soon as
Yeah.
something slips, it just yeah,
Well, and
it
it's
just
kind of
adds to
one
the
of those
pressure.
like last weekend I had everything caught up. This weekend it was like, well, that happened. Catch back up.
Yep.
So just like one day, you have one day where like you spend a couple hours at lunch. That's a couple hours of audio that didn't get edited at the end of the day.
Yes.
So,
Right. Yep, exactly, exactly.
but it's the same with, authoring. And do you like have a set time in your day that you write or just when you have time
Oh,
available? How does that work
so
for you?
I had a problem with the beginning of this. So we moved,
Okay.
and we moved and we switched school systems. And so my
Okay.
kids actually start school an hour earlier. And I had no idea how much that was going to mess with me because I write at night. So everybody would go to bed and I'd take a couple hours and I would write.
Mhm.
But with the now that time isn't there, right? Like I get
Right.
to, and all of a sudden it's not there, and I'm really struggling to figure out how to get that consistency back, right? And how
Well, and the
to
shift in schedule would
oh,
throw
it
you.
killed me. Yeah.
It's like with daylight savings time, it takes you a couple weeks
A
to
couple
catch
weeks,
up.
and I'd like to say it's a couple weeks, but embarrassingly enough, it's been almost a year, and I still just haven't quite figured out how to. Well, and then the other thing that I had is I'm very external deadline driven.
Mhm.
So I can't give myself a deadline, right? Like if someone's depending upon me, I will absolutely make that deadline. There's like I will make it happen. But if it's just me, I'm like, if it takes another week, it'll be
So
fine.
you need to schedule your editor ahead of time. So
I do, and I had this editor that I had to do every month. I had so many words that had to go, and it had to be done by the end of the month, or I lost it.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I'm not gonna lose that. This is gonna happen. I'm gonna make it happen. She's no longer editing. So now I lost between the schedule change and no longer having that monthly deadline. I'm like, oh, what am I gonna do?
So you need to get you a like PA or a writing buddy or something that's
Do
like, you need to like
something.
hold me accountable.
Yep. And I did this last book I finished, which was a Christmas miracle. I felt like, but I think it was helping break me free from that. Right. So I've got the next book started. I've got honestly 4 books that are half started that I just need to finish them because I kept thinking, well, maybe if I trade projects, it would get better. Yeah, no, no. Then I get halfway through, and then the things we like try to trick ourselves with. It's very funny.
Yeah. So in all of this, so I have a full-time job, which is kind of an on-call situation. It's usually like 2 hours in the morning of like sitting at my desk, and then I'm on
Yep.
call the rest of the day. So it works well for the narrating. I can narrate in the middle of that as long as I can stop and answer the phone and then go back
Right.
to it. Um, but I decide at the beginning of the year, like, oh, I'm doing all this fiction narrating, so now I'm getting inspired to like write my own stuff. So I start this book, and then I'm about, I don't know, 30,000 words into the book, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it'd be really cool to write a mythology based book. So I buy all the mythology
Right.
books
Right. Right. The
because,
whatever Finch and the yeah.
well, you're like, and for me, I'm like, I don't want to write a mythology based book and not have read the mythology stuff.
Right.
And then I buy all these books and I'm looking at them and I start reading some of them. And then I got behind on like reading for narration. And then I'm like, when the heck am I going to have time to read these books?
Right. In order to write the thing that I wanted to write that I stopped writing the previous thing for.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. So at this point, I'm just like, just keep plowing ahead, reading the narration books. I'm like maybe a week behind on what I should have read at this point. So
Yep.
I'm getting caught up.
That's
Um,
good. Yep.
But I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, why did you think this was a good plan? And at this point, I've like stopped auditioning for audiobooks and I'm still getting audiobooks. I'm
That's
like,
funny. Yeah.
It's a good problem to have. It's a
It
very
is
good
it is a
problem
good
to
problem to
have.
have. Yep.
But yeah, it's very much I feel like, um and I'm a digital calendar person, but I feel like at
Yes.
some point in your this applies to you or anybody trying to figure out when to squeeze the time into the day,
Yep.
um, anyone can benefit from I have, I wake up at this time and I go to bed at this time.
Right.
I could
Those are my hours.
maybe stay up an extra hour, maybe wake up a little early, whatever
Yep.
the case may be, but here's what I have to do in my day. And for me, it was I had to cut out some TikTok watching time to
Right.
read more to get
Right.
ahead.
Right.
So
Yep.
that extra 30 minutes of I used to stop at whatever I was doing at 9 and watch TikTok for 30 minutes. Now it's like, nope, at 9:30 now you gotta stop. And
Right. And do this other thing. Well, and then I don't know if you do this, like, sometimes the thing that I'm working on, I'm, like, stuck. Like, it's not really stuck, but, like, my unconscious mind is like, pitching a fit, and it's saying there's something that's not quite right, but my unconscious mind does not know how to talk to the rest of me, so suddenly I've read 10 books, and the house is clean. Okay, cleaner. Um,
let's be
right?
honest here.
Let's be honest, right? Like, cleaner. But and then you look up and you're like, I haven't written for like 10 days. Oh, I'm stuck. Why did you tell me I was stuck? And then you're like, find your friend and you're like, okay, let me tell you about blah, 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 and suddenly you're not stuck again. It's like, so I do that. I have that happen to me too. And I'm just like, seriously, if my brain would just tell me what was going on, as crazy as that sounds, um,
Yeah.
I might, not quite, I might be more efficient with my time, perhaps.
Mine is usually like, oh, I'm 2 weeks ahead in daily fiction podcast episodes. I don't need to record right now. I'll do, something else for a little bit. And then I'm
Yep.
like, oh crap, I don't have an episode for tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Right.
So
Right.
it's like, so like right
Right.
now, I think there's 2 loaded in ready to go. And then I have like 10 that need to be edited and loaded up.
Oh, right.
So
You're
they're
like,
there
ah.
and they're ready, but I haven't listened to them yet.
Right. Right. And
The
again, it's
things we
taking up
do.
that same time, like you said, from here's
Yeah.
my time. And okay, I'm taking this chunk now to catch up on all that. So, okay.
But then again, if you don't want to go anywhere, don't do
Right.
anything. If you
Right.
want to go somewhere, you have to work hard, and
You
that
have to.
takes time.
Yes.
So,
And priority, right? Because what we're really saying is for the 24 hours, these are the things that we're prioritizing to the top so that they get done.
mhm.
So I might love to hike, and I do, but I don't do it very often because, trying to write and being with my kids and eating goes on top of that.
I mean, exercise is important too, but hikes take a lot longer than, 30 minutes on an exercise
On an
bike in your living
exercise
room. So
bike. Right. Right. Yeah.
I tried to do I just bought one of the hula hoops. I don't know if you've seen those on
I
TikTok,
have.
the like weird weighted things. Anyway, I bought one of those and then I promptly injured my back so
Oh
that I can't
no.
use
You're like, oh, okay. We'll set that on the wall.
Yeah, I'm like, it's hanging on the exercise bike actually.
That's funny because you're going to be on the exercise bike going like this.
I mean, it had to hang somewhere. So
I'm always afraid if I put stuff on like the exercise bike, though, that at some point I'm not going to remember it's an exercise bike. I'm going to think it's like, a clothes holder or whatever, and that it's not going to get used.
yeah, we kind of have this like exercise nook in our living
Okay.
room where like the exercise bike is, and there's like the weights, and I have like a kettlebell, and I don't remember
Yeah.
what
I
else is
love
in that
kettlebells.
corner,
Yeah.
but like it's only exercise stuff in that little area.
Yeah.
So, and I
That's
have one of
good.
those like ones that kind of folds up, so I have to like move it out
Move
of the
it.
little corner to
Yeah.
use it. But yeah, no clothes or blankets or pillows are getting stuck on it.
It's probably good. One less thing that you have to move in order to use the equipment. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
The things we do.
And how we trick ourselves into trying to be healthy and getting our goals done. So,
So, what has worked for you? So, you said you've tried a bunch of different things with the promoting. What seems to have
mhm.
worked the best for you? What have you learned? What works and what hasn't worked?
So I think doing something like what I'm doing with you seems like it actually does work where, we talk and we have a frank conversation and we have fun and, people see that I'm not just a cardboard cutout.
I try to make it not so like, here's the list of
Hello.
10 questions to like
Oh,
answer.
I know. And some of those questions sometimes between the interviews, I'm like, oh, wait, I've already answered this somewhere. Oh, here's my answer. I've been asked that 4 times.
When I ask the one weird one, I always start out with the fairy tale one because one,
Yeah.
it's a very good icebreaker. It's like people aren't usually expecting that. It gets them into
Yep.
thinking. It's not a like stressful thing to answer. Everybody knows what
Right.
story they liked as a kid for the most
Right.
part. I
For the
haven't had
most part.
anyone not know
Yeah,
what
I
they
hate
liked.
stories.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I would hope that if you're an author, you like
Right.
stories.
You like
Um,
stories. Maybe you're a nonfiction author. I don't know.
I've only interviewed one of those, and she wrote her own memoir. So, like,
Ooh.
that was it was a little bit different because, like, some of the questions don't that I would
Right.
normally ask in
What's
the
your
flow of
inspiration?
conversation.
My life.
Right? Yeah, I'm not gonna ask that. For her, we went into a little bit of her life story because
Yeah.
that applied.
Yep. Yep.
Um, but yeah, no, it's it's different, but I had one, like, business author, and I was like, "Yeah, it doesn't really fit the format, so, like, this isn't gonna be a good fit."
Right.
So that's I mean, and he was really cool about it, so,
That's
yeah,
good.
like, fiction, whatever. We'll just go with what we can. So what is you said you had a book that's, well, by the time this airs, it will have come out. What is the
Mhm.
most recent thing you've got going on?
So it's the story Ravine. It is part of a series that I'm starting that's called Renegades Rising.
Okay.
And so it is so I told you a little bit about the Relic trilogy, which
Mhm.
is science fantasy, and it's set on this distant jungle planet
Okay.
with some orphans and time travel and all sorts of different crazy things going on. But the bad guy in that series, in that trilogy, is Ravine. And Ravine's whole thing is that she is trying to save her daughter. Her daughter had died years and years earlier, and Ravine blamed herself and the company she was working for. And she
Mhm.
decided she was going to create time travel to save her daughter.
Okay.
So this story, Ravine, is about how she goes about trying to do that.
And then
And so
eventually
it's,
becomes the bad guy?
oh yeah, oh yeah, it's a long, twisted story.
That's fun.
Yep. Well, part of it was like losing your child, right? Like, how far, what would you do to try and get them back? Like, how far
Mhm.
would you go as a mom? Like, and authors are all very, not all of us, but some of us like are doomsday and you're always thinking, oh my God, what would happen if they died in the flood? Or what would happen if they, you know what I mean? Because your brain is
What's the worst
constantly
case
doing
scenario?
what's the worst case scenario?
Yeah.
And so I started thinking about with my daughter ended up having to get stitches and she had this big I had a scare at daycare where she ended up in the hospital. And so I
Okay.
had that moment of going, what would I do to keep her safe? What would I do to get her back?
Mhm.
And then started like really going deep. And so Ravine is like, she's ended up basically enslaving a whole population
Oh
in the
gosh.
attempt to get her daughter back, right? Like, she is not a
Wow.
good person. She has done like, there's scientists out of airlocks, and there's like, she set up her, but lots of just terrible, terrible things that she's done. And it's too much like at the end of the book of the trilogy, I really ended up liking her. As crazy it sounds, that
So you
she
have the
went through
whole
this
trilogy
whole
done,
trilogy's done. Yep,
but you
beginning,
haven't
middle,
released
end.
one yet?
That trilogy is done. So now it's Ravine's story where I'm like, okay, well,
Okay,
how did
okay.
she get here? So how did she become that mastermind? How did she get to where she controlled the whole planet and she set up, a caste system? And like, how did she even like how did this even happen that she decided to invent time travel? I mean, like, who does that? Right?
I
Like,
think the first series I really remember that went into that, like, how did it happen was the Maze Runner series.
yeah,
I don't know if you've ever read
I haven't, but I've
that
heard
one.
of it. Yeah.
Yeah, so that one, they wrote, like I think it's a trilogy, and
Yeah.
then I have all the books, but I think it's a trilogy of, like, from they're trapped in this maze going forward, and then they wrote, like, a prequel where it's like, "Where'd the maze come from?"
Right.
Like,
Right.
which is very like, I almost feel like you have to read the original books first and then read the
First.
prequel, because if you
Yep.
read the prequel, it gives too much away for the rest of the series.
Right. Well, and there is sometimes like if, I've noticed that with authors, and even like something like Star Wars, right? Like
Mhm.
I, did it in the order that I did it, right? Because I did the the middle ones first, obviously,
Mhm.
and but people who are just getting into the franchise, if you start at the beginning, it's a whole different experience
Yes.
than doing it the other direction. So yes, I do think there might be like a what's your recommended order for reading this, and I'm going to be like I don't know, do the trilogy first if you want to get curious about Ravine, or do Ravine first if you want to find out, what happens when she finally gets her goal of trying to get her daughter back.
So you need like two charts, the chronological order chart, and then the
Yep.
if you don't want spoilers before you read the bulk of the series, read it in this order
In this
chart.
order. Yeah. Yeah. But
Yeah,
it's
that's
so
cool.
Ravine is coming out, and as you said, it's going to be October 24th of 2022. I have to add the two there. Sorry. COVID time warp. Um, and I should have, there's going to be, I think they're going to be called, they're tentatively titled Mouse, Lyra, and the Duchess are going to be part of the Renegade crew. And then it's all going to come together. And right now I'm calling it Hostile Takeover.
Okay.
The final book where all of those POV characters come together, and I'm going to say save the world. So, as you
Tentatively, that
do.
is the plan right now.
Tentatively, that's the plan. But, I told you about my dreams and how things come up. So there you go.
That's fun. Claudia liked Aesop's fables growing up. Aesop's Fables, or the Aesopica, is a collection of fables credited to Aesop, a slave and storyteller believed to have lived in ancient Greece between 620 and 564 BCE. Of diverse origins, the stories associated with his name have descended to modern times through a number of sources, and continue to be reinterpreted in different verbal registers, and in popular as well as artistic media. The fables originally belonged to oral tradition and were not collected for some 3 centuries after Aesop's death. By that time, a variety of other stories, jokes, and proverbs were being ascribed to him, although some of that material was from sources earlier than him, or came from beyond the Greek cultural sphere. The process of inclusion has continued until the present, with some of the fables unrecorded before the late Middle Ages, and others arriving from outside Europe. The process is continuous, and new stories are still being added to the Aesop corpus, even when they are demonstrably more recent work and sometimes from known authors. Manuscripts in Latin and Greek were important avenues of transmission, although poetical treatments in European vernaculars eventually formed another. On the arrival of printing, collections of Aesop's fables were among the earliest books in a variety of languages. Through the means of later collections and translations or adaptations of them, Aesop's reputation as a fabulist was transmitted throughout the world. Initially, the fables were addressed to adults and covered religious, social, and political themes. They were also put to use as ethical guides, and from the Renaissance onwards were particularly used for the education of children. Their ethical dimension was reinforced in the adult world through depiction in sculpture, painting, and other illustrative means, as well as adaptation to drama and song. In addition, there have been reinterpretations of the meaning of fables, and changes in emphasis over time. Today we'll be reading The Hare and the Hound, one of Aesop's fables. Don't forget, we're reading Les Morts d'Arthur, the story of King Arthur and of his noble knights of the Round Table on our Patreon. You can find the link in the show notes. The Hare and the Hound. A hound started a hare from his lair, but after a long run gave up the chase. A goat herd, seeing him, stopped, mocking him, saying, "The little one is the best runner of the two." The hound replied, "You do not see the difference between us. I was only running for a dinner, but he for his life." Thank you for joining Freya's Fairy Tales. Be sure to come back next week for the conclusion of Claudia's journey to holding her own fairy tale in her hands, and to hear another of her favorite fairy tales.